Welcome to Wandering Jews, a J-Square Adventures. Travel far enough and you meet yourself.
We're your hosts. I'm Scott.
And I'm Sorelle.
And whether you're going out to pick up the groceries, or on the way to the gym, or maybe you're on the way to the airport for your next Jewish journey, we're back when we're happy to join you.
Today, we're diving into the epic legend of the Golem of Prague and its modern twist with the Golem of Rehovot, all while exploring graphic novels, movies, and the wild world of artificial intelligence.
So we want to just set the scene as we start to lay out the broad strokes of this story. The Golem is connected mainly with the city of Prague and mainly with the synagogue known as the Alt Neu Shul, the Old New Synagogue. The Old New Synagogue was already built in the 1300s, and when it was renamed the Old New Synagogue, that was in modern times in the 1600s. And so the scope of history that we're talking about is really quite amazing. The oldest synagogue in Europe, and celebrated, among other reasons, because of its connection with the famous scientist, halachist, philosopher, and mystic, Rabbi Yehuda, who was known as the Maharal. And according to Jewish legend, the Jewish community in Prague, under incredible duress, the victims of rabid anti-Semitism, Rabbi Yehuda made a living being out of clay. He reached back to the very book of Genesis where God made human beings from the earth and from the parts of their own bodies, Eve being made from Adam's rib. And he made an artificial person, an artificial creature. The Golem was sent to do basic tasks, draw water, clean the synagogue. It was a creature that, according to some of the legends, had no power of speech, because perhaps this was one of the testimonies of human intelligence, and maybe also of a divine spark. And he was also a defender. And when the Jews found themselves under attack, victims once again, the Golem was sent out to guard and protect and to defend Jewish life in Prague. The story is told that eventually the Golem went out of control. It ran crazy. It lost any ability to discern. The Maharal, Rabbi Yehuda, was busy being a rabbi, studying, dealing with the community, and he wasn't able to oversee everything the Golem was doing all the time. And according to the legend, Rabbi Yehuda had to bring the Golem to its knees, to return it to become just an inanimate lump of clay. And so some say that on the forehead of the Golem was written 3 Hebrew letters, the word for truth, emet, and it had to be erased. And another says that a special parchment was placed inside the Golem's mouth, and it had on it the 4 letters of the name of the divine, and it had to be removed. What happened to the Golem? We just don't know. But there are those who say that standing at the grounds on the Old New Shul, that in the attic on the upper floor, still today lies the remains of the creature that was created by the Maharal to serve and protect and defend the Jews of Prague when they needed. So it really is an amazing story because it is a kind of a Jewish, is it science fiction? Is it a fairy tale? And we know that throughout the ages, this story became very famous and quite well known, actually also among non-Jews. And it seems that at the time when folks like Hans Andersen and the Brothers Grimm were reviving traditional folk tales, also in Czechia, they were doing the same thing as part of building their national identity. And a non-Jewish writer named Gustav Meyrink wrote about the Golem, and his version became really a central part of the literature of the Czech people, and maybe says something about the place of the Jews in the non-Jewish imagination of the Czechs and of Central Europe. Later, other versions of the Golem. So, for example, take the novel Frankenstein. Mary Shelley, who traveled all through Europe, brilliant woman and very unusual for her day, Her book, which tells the story of a scientist/mystic harnessing the powers of nature to bring to life a monster, maybe has something to do with the Golem. Even in modern comic books. Marvel comic books in the 1970s has the appearance of the Golem in several issues of a series called Strange Tales. He appears in the desert after a Jewish archaeologist uncovers him somewhere in the Sinai. And this is in the period after the Yom Kippur War in 1973. And he saves the archaeologists, a group of Jews and Israelis, from a terrorist onslaught.
Wow.
Later, other figures who were inspired. The Hulk.
Right.
The Thing, Benjamin Grimm from the Fantastic Four, who he himself, a man of rock, transformed into rock, not clay, but who is a monster and inside with a human heart. And he himself actually one of the first Jewish comic book characters, revealing himself not when he was created in the 1960s, but much later, and even in one comic book celebrating his bar mitzvah on what used to be the Lower East Side.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. So my encounter with the Golem actually was not in Prague. My encounter with the Golem was in my city of Rehovot. It's actually coming up to 10 years of me living in Rehovot. It's known as the City of Science, the Weizmann Institute as our pride and joy. And I have various friends. I have photographer, architect, scientist, librarian friends employed by the Weizmann Institute. So over the years, I've got to kind of be exposed to different aspects of the Institute's glory. And it's thanks to my photographer friend last week that I learned about the Golem of Rehovot. And in honor of the podcast, she actually gave me a tour of the math building where the Golem of Rehovot, otherwise known as the WISAC, the Weizmann Automatic Computer, lives. So here's the story, okay? It's the mid-1950s, and Israel's first computer, the Middle East's first computer, was built. And the site of the Weizmann Institute by Weizmann scientists and engineers led by Professor Chaim Pekaris. And it was called, as I said, the WISAC, short for Weizmann Automatic Computer. So it was a big deal. It wasn't actually just the first in the Middle East. It was one of the first computers to be built in the world. And they were working on various iterations of it. There were some problems with it. So they kept on improving and refining. And in 1959, a couple of years later, they were ready to launch their improved version of the WISAC. Now, upon hearing about it, Gershom Scholem, a famous mysticist and writer, philosopher, he put in a request to the Weizmann Institute that the computer be named the Golem of Rehovot. Interesting. Actually, this was not Gershom Scholem's first interaction with the Weizmann Institute. He'd actually reached out to the Weizmann Institute previously and was rejected to set up a department there for mystery and for magic. So he was turned down. But when it came to calling the computer the Golem of Rehovot, the Weizmann Institute decided to cut a deal with him. We will call it the Golem of Rehovot if you attend our dedication ceremony. So he complied. He was happy to do that. And during the dedication, he explains exactly why, because it's not obvious. Why would this first computer being built, what's it got to do with the golem that you've described, Scott? So in his remarks, he talked about the obvious. To him, he painted it out as being an obvious comparison between the classic tale of the golem and the brand new computer. And he gave several reasons, and he explained that at the foundation, the golem, the Maharal's robot, and the golem Aleph, the Golem of Rehovot, had the same most basic function. The golem was brought to life by the combination of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet that took the shape of the name of God, the divine. And the golem computer, right, knows only two symbols, the 0 and 1, that make up the binary system. So everything in his mind could be translated into just these two terms so that the golem Aleph can process it. And he said, and I quote, "I dare say the old Kabbalists would have been glad to learn of this simplification of their own system. This is progress." He saw it that both the golem and the golem Aleph function through energy and through the ineffable name of God and the computer, through the golem was able to harness the use of electric energy. So, we've mapped out the journey from the 16th century, the time of persecution from the Jews, all the way through Frankenstein, Marvel Comics. Here we are, Israel's first computer being built. And today we see even more so. We see in terms of artificial intelligence, how there is just so much as time progresses, unbridled power. And you were talking about the Golem and, the Maharal of Prague can't be on duty all the time to keep in check. Are we really in check of the powers that we have with artificial intelligence? Because everything I'm reading, Scott, it seems a little scary, honestly, the power.
It's strange how this year in particular, with everything going on, the Golem, at least for me, seems much more real. And I had the opportunity to be in Prague earlier this year with a group. And we were standing right below the Altneuschel. And we were visiting the Jewish Quarter and seeing the sites. And it really is an amazing, amazing set of synagogues because it tells such a rich story of the Jewish Middle Ages in the city of Prague. One of my favorite stories, and there are so many about the Golem, from Cynthia Ozik's novel, where actually in New York City and the Golem is a woman, to Michael Chabon, his book about the creation of comic books, and of course the character Clay Man, which is obviously a reference to the Golem, to Isaac Bashevis Singer. It's really captured the modern Jewish imagination, maybe because there's something about the way we want to understand Judaism, maybe in the 20th century, where everything was very rational. We wanted Judaism to fit in, and the Golem is something quite wild and fantastic. And I think a lot of these writers, and even people like Gershom Scholem, they wanted to reintroduce that idea of the mythic and the fantastic and the beyond to our Jewishness. And when I was there earlier this year, I chose to look at the story from Yud Lamed Peretz, the Golem. Peretz was a Yiddish writer. Those of you who have visited Warsaw have had the honor of visiting his gravesite. He was a socialist. He was a Yiddishist. He was someone who believed in the national redemption of the Jewish people in many ways through language. And he tells the following story. When I read the opening lines, you'll understand maybe why I had the connection with 2024. And he starts, "Great men were once able to perform great miracles. When the ghetto of Prague was under attack and marauders wanted to rape the women, roast the children, and murder everyone, when it seemed that all hope was lost, the Maharal, Rabbi Yehuda Lau, put aside his Gemara, went out into the street, and from the first suitable mound of clay that he found, molded the shape of a body." And how can one not read Yud Lamed Peretz, written in 1893, and not think about 2024, and not think about October 7th, and not think about everything, unfortunately, we have been exposed to, subjugated to over the last 7 or 8 months? The other thing I couldn't help thinking about were films like Inglourious Bastards, because there is something in the Golem story which is a Jewish revenge fantasy for a people who lived without any power, always oppressed, always strangers, who knew what it meant to be a stranger everywhere and nowhere at home. The Golem was the one way that they could dream about, hey,
take back the power.
Take back the power, exactly. They couldn't do it themselves, and so they handed it over to the Golem, like we do it at the end of the Scroll of Esther on Purim. We celebrate the downfall of our enemies, and the scroll ends with the Jews going out to attack and defeat their enemies. The Passover Seder, the places where we talk about the plagues of Egypt.
There's a theme.
There's a theme. For a people who had no power, literature gave people a chance to act out the dream of having power. And of course, it goes without saying, we're going out from October 7th. And on the one hand, there's no doubt that the current war that we're in is justified, is legitimate. that the need to defend ourselves, even with all the horrible outcomes of it, is a necessity. But the story of the Golem, I think, forces us to ask the question, where do we reach that line where legitimate defense becomes vicious revenge? And those kinds of people in Israel who have, for example, even government ministers, let's throw an atomic bomb on. That's in some ways taking the revenge fantasies from Purim, from Passover, from the story of the Golem, and forgetting, hey, today we have a state of our own. We're part of an international community, although we don't always like it. We have F-16s, we have tanks, and we have to think about how we behave, because the difference between fantasy and reality is understanding what are the limits of responsibility and the way that we build the future with each and every choice that we make, even in the toughest of times. So for me, the Golem is, I think, an amazing story because it really is so relevant. And one of our conversations, you mentioned, Peter Parker. When Peter Parker, back to comic books, Spider-Man, famously, when his uncle was murdered, the last thing that he says to Peter Parker is, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think that really connects us back with the story of the Golem. And so when we're standing there at the bottom of the small grassy lawn next to the Alt Neuschel, with the alleyway that's full of shopkeepers and folks selling all kinds of Jewish paraphernalia and trinkets, including figures of the Golem, we look up and, we ask ourselves, the Golem? Is he still up there in the attic? Is he still waiting to be awakened? David Frischman, the famous Jewish author, in 1922, one of the first to really write about the Golem in a nonfiction setting, he said, it's said that the Golem lives everywhere and in all times.
And here we go. We're here with something for the road. As you know, each episode, Sorelle and I have a guest from our J Squared squad, one of our staff people, one of our explore educators, the people who are behind the scenes and in front of the scenes and on top of the scenes to make J Squared adventures happen. Today we're talking with Yoni Millo, and like we usually do, I'm just going to ask Yoni to tell a little bit about himself, about his family, about where he's at, and we'll move to his recommendation, his something for the road. Yoni, how are you? Great that you joined us.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Share a little bit about yourself, where you're at these days, what's happening with you.
So my name is Yoni Millo. I live in the holy city of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Moved here about a bit over a year ago with my wife and now a toddler of a child. I am from Israel, even though I don't sound it. I moved here from Tel Aviv and I have the pleasure of being the North American representative for J Squared, one of them. And I have a lot of pleasure of meeting with a lot of our trip leaders and amazing clients and working with them to make their trips happen to Israel and around the world.
And to share with the folks who are listening, Yoni also has a rich background in Jewish education and leadership and in activism, both in Israel and on the college campuses. Maybe, Yoni, you want to share a word about those projects?
Yeah, with pleasure. So on college campus, I used to work as director of Israel education at Yale Hillel for 3 years and learned a lot about it, both seeing what's happening on campuses and seeing what kind of work can be done to, have a real dialogue about Jewish identity and how does Israel play a part in it. And activism, I've been very active politically in Israel. In my last count, I believe I've worked on 8 election campaigns, which sounds more impressive than what it is, considering how often you have elections in Israel. I used to work for the Yesh Atid party, running elections in Tel Aviv. So in case you want to know voting patterns in different neighborhoods around Tel Aviv, I'm your person.
Excellent. And today we asked Yoni to think about a book that he found particularly inspiring, exciting, and compelling, and he thought would be a good recommendation to share with people who are getting ready to come to Israel or who just returned from Israel and still want to keep that taste of Israel and Israel happenings. Yoni, go for it. What's your recommendation?
So it's interesting when Sky reached out to me and told me to think about a book, it was, was easy for me to go, as somebody who did work in Jewish education, to go to a lot of, the books that everyone goes to, if it's, My Promised Land or like Dreamers or anything from Micha Goodman or Daniel Gordis. It's, your normal authors. And I tried to go a little bit off of the impact and tell a story more of Israel that's less known. So I mentioned I lived in Tel Aviv. I'm from Jerusalem. I grew up there. And the book that I want to recommend is Mishu Larutz Ito, Someone to Run With, by David Grossman. It's a book that, at least for me, I read in high school as part of Hebrew in Hebrew and English, and there's also a great movie of it if you want to watch. It's also very, very good. It came out about 15 years ago. And the reason I chose to recommend this book compared to the, your normal or, more standard, history, nonfiction books, but also books that tell you about narratives to do with Israel, is this book is completely nonfiction, but it tells the story of a very real Jerusalem that I grew up with and I connect to a lot. It's not a book that's going to tell you too much about the old city, about religion, all these different things that people come to Jerusalem and with great anticipation expect to hear about and think about, the different narratives, the different sites, the different complexities of religion and nationality that exist within Jerusalem. This is a book for me, as somebody who grew up in Jerusalem, represents by Jerusalem much more. It's a book that talks about the different places in Jerusalem, about the different people you meet in Jerusalem. It's a very, it's almost an intimate book because it tells like stories of people who grew up there. And if you have the pleasure like me of growing up in Jerusalem, where all the places that are mentioned in this place, like Zion Square and Leafswell and Ben Yehuda Street, all places that, this is just where we make childhood memories. And that's why I wanted to recommend this book for somebody who wants to come to, when they come to Israel and they want to connect the books to Israel and Jerusalem, well, more than just the things they hear from before. It reminds you a lot of Yehuda Amichai's poem, The Tourist, seeing the place for more than what it is and what you expect.
Definitely. It's a thriller. It's about friendship. It's about growing up. It's about coming of age. It's about getting lost. It's about a boy and his dog. It's a great, great read. And yeah, I really like that sense of the intimate history, and Grossman and other authors who are telling Israel stories in small towns and in neighborhoods and in cities all around the country. They're bringing the things to life. And hopefully when people come to visit Israel, they'll be able to see some of the places that you mentioned, Lifta and Ben Yehuda and Zion Square, and maybe they'll have read the book based on your recommendation, and that light bulb will shine, and they'll say, wow, I remember when Yoni said, read this book. Someone to run with. David Grossman. Yoni, thanks so much for joining us. We will definitely have you back, and best of luck with everything in Toronto. No snow on the ground right now. May?
No snow. It's over the 0 degrees right here, so we're celebrating.
Excellent. Yofi. So enjoy, and best of luck to everyone. And we'll talk soon. Thanks for joining us, and wait till next episode. Be well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tony. Be well. Thank you.
Well, that wraps up our conversation for today, but we will be back in a few weeks with a new episode of The Wandering Jews. We hope today's conversation sparked something inside you, whether it's a new idea, place to see, or a handy tip for your next trip. Dive deeper into the world of travel on our J Squared Adventures website and stay in the loop with our latest adventures on all our social media platforms. And if you enjoyed hanging out with us, don't forget to leave a comment, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We would love to hear from you. Until next time, travel safely and keep wandering. I'm Sorelle.
I'm Scott.
See you next time at Wandering Jews.